My name is Caleb Redhawk. For 30 years, the sky over Alaska was my domain. I'd logged thousands of hours in cockpits, guiding planes through blizzards, fog, and the endless summer twilight of the last frontier. Flying wasn't just my job, it was who I was. On June 15, 2011, I sat in the captain's seat of an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737-800, preparing for a routine flight from Anchorage to Juneau. 50 passengers were aboard, eager for the scenic views of Alaska's rugged coast. Beside me was Ayana Snow, my co-pilot, a Yupik woman with sharp eyes and a calm that steadied any storm. In the jump seat sat Michael Torres, our flight engineer, a rookie with a quick mind and a grin that hit his nerves. The weather was perfect, clear skies, gentle winds, visibility stretching to the horizon. Pre-flight checks on the 737 were flawless, engines humming, fuel tanks full, no warning lights. We taxied out from Ted Stevens International at 10 a.m., the familiar rumble of takeoff vibrating through me as we climbed into the Alaskan sky. The first 30 minutes were textbook. We leveled off at 30,000 feet, the Chugach Mountains sprawling below like a jagged white quilt. I glanced at the instruments, airspeed steady, altitude holding. Ayana and I swapped a few words, professional but easy. Michael fiddled with his clipboard, double-checking systems. I even let myself enjoy the view for a moment, the sun glinting off distant peaks. Then it happened. A sharp bang tore through the cabin, like a gunshot amplified 100 times. The plane lurched, and the right engine's gauges flared red. Engine failure. Ayana shouted, her hands flying to the controls. Michael scrambled to the panel, yelling, "Fire in number 2." Warning alarms blared, drowning out thought. I grabbed the yoke, fighting to steady us, but the Boeing shuddered again, harder this time, as cabin pressure dropped. Oxygen masks fell, and a roar filled my ears, the sound of air ripping through a breach. "Mayday! Mayday!" I barked into the radio. Alaska Airlines 214 engine failure, requesting emergency assistance. Static crackled back, no response. The yoke felt dead in my hands, sluggish as the plane pitched into a dive. "Michael, shut it down." I ordered, but he was already flipping switches, his face pale. Ayana called out altitudes, 25,000, 20,000, dropping too fast. Snow-capped peaks rushed up to meet us. I trained for this, every pilot had. But no simulator could match the chaos of a real crash. My mind raced through procedures while my gut screamed the truth, we weren't going to make it. The last thing I saw was the Chugach's icy fangs, then blackness swallowed me whole. I didn't feel the impact. No pain, no cold, just silence. I opened my eyes, or thought I did, and found myself hovering above the wreckage. The Boeing lay shattered across a mountainside, its fuselage split, wings torn, black smoke curling from the ruined right engine. My body slumped in the cockpit, blood staining my uniform. Ayana lay nearby, her braid fanned across broken glass. Michael was crumpled against the console, lifeless. In the distance, faint sirens wailed as rescue teams approached through the snow. I should have panicked, but I couldn't. I was detached, a witness to my own end. Then a warmth brushed my skin, not fire, but a gentle wind, glowing faintly with golden light. It tugged at me, lifting me from the crash site. I resisted, wanting to stay with Ayana and Michael, but the wind grew stronger, pulling me upward through clouds until the world below vanished. I stood or floated in a vast expanse of white, serene, and boundless. A figure appeared before me, not crowned in glory or seated on a throne, but simple, a man in a white robe, his dark hair framing a face both ordinary and extraordinary. His eyes held a depth I couldn't fathom, brimming with love. "Caleb," he said, his voice soft like a summer breeze through pines. I knew him instantly, Jesus. He laid a hand on my shoulder, and my life unfolded around me, not as memories, but as living beams of light. I saw my first solo flight, the pride in my father's eyes. I saw the times I'd stayed late to train rookies like Michael, the passengers I'd calmed during turbulence. Small moments, a kind word, a steady hand, rippled outward, touching lives I'd never traced. "You're not done," Jesus said. "Go back and carry my love." The wind swirled again, and I felt myself falling not down, but back. I gasped awake to the beep of machines and the sting of antiseptic. Pain flooded my body, ribs cracked, lungs burning, but I was alive. Doctors swarmed me in a Juneau hospital room, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," one muttered, scanning my chart. "No one survives that." My family rushed in, my wife, Lena, sobbing as she gripped my hand, my son, Dakota, wide-eyed but silent. The crash made headlines. Alaska Airlines Flight 214 down in Chugach Range, miracle survivor. Ayana and Michael didn't make it. Most passengers perished, though a handful lived, pulled from the wreckage by luck or grace. Investigators blamed a rare mechanical flaw in the engine, but I knew better. I'd been sent back. At first, I couldn't speak of it. How do you explain standing before Jesus, feeling a love that rewrote your soul? Lena thought my silence was trauma. Dakota assumed I was grieving. But the truth burned in me, a fire I couldn't douse. Weeks later, healed enough to leave the hospital, I started talking. I told Lena first, expecting skepticism from my practical wife. She listened, her brow furrowed, then whispered, "I believe you, Caleb." I felt something that day, like you weren't really gone. Dakota at 16 nodded slowly. "You're different now, Dad." I spoke to others, friends, fellow pilots, even strangers at a diner. I described the crash, the wind, Jesus' touch, and the purpose he gave me, to share his love. Some listened, I sobbed with wonder. Others scoffed, calling it a hallucination from oxygen loss. A pilot buddy, Jim, patted my shoulder. "You hit your head, man. It happens." But I saw their doubts waver when I kept going. I quit flying not from fear, but because the cockpit felt small compared to what I'd seen. I started volunteering hospitals, shelters, anywhere people hurt. I met a woman named Nita, a nurse who'd lost her son in a car wreck. I told her my story and she cried, saying, "I've been waiting to hear that." She began seeking Jesus, a spark igniting in her grief. Word spread in Anchorage. People sought me out, some curious, some desperate. A mechanic, Ray, who'd worked on my plane, cornered me one day. "If your Jesus is real, why'd he let Ayana die?" I didn't have an answer, just the truth. "I don't know, but he sent me back to tell you he's here." Ray didn't believe, but he kept asking. I faced resistance too. Alaska Airlines offered me a desk job, then withdrew it when I wouldn't stop talking about Jesus. Old colleagues distanced themselves, whispering I'd lost it. Lena stood by me, but Dakota struggled, embarrassed by his crazy dad. Yet for every door that closed, another opened. Nita started a prayer group, pulling in others I'd touched. Ray showed up one night, eyes red, admitting he'd felt something too. In 2012, I spoke at a church in Juneau near the crash site. Hundreds came, survivors, families of the lost, even skeptics. I told them everything, ending with, "You're not alone. His love is waiting." A man in the back, a rescuer from that day, stood. "I saw you dead, Caleb. Now I see why you're here." He wept, and others followed. Years later, I sit writing this under the Alaskan sky, gray hair streaking my head. The fire Jesus lit in me burns through others. Now Nita heals with faith. Ray guides men like him. Dakota found his own path to grace. I've lost much, my career, some friends, but gained more, a purpose beyond the clouds. If you're reading this, know you're meant for something. I crashed into death and flew back on his wind. That love is yours too, step toward it. As I finish these words, I hear the wind again, warm and familiar. I know he's near, and when my time comes, I'll soar into that light once more. The years after the crash weren't all light and triumph. By 2013, I'd spoken to hundreds across Alaska, church basements in Anchorage, fishing villages along the coast, even a rehab center in Fairbanks. Each time I shared how Jesus pulled me from death with that glowing wind, I saw faces change. Some soften with hope, others harden with disbelief. But the fire in me flickered at times, shadowed by doubts I couldn't shake. One night, Lena found me staring out our cabin window, the Chugach Mountains looming dark under a moonless sky. "Caleb," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you've been quiet lately. What's eating you?" I didn't answer right away. How could I tell her I sometimes wondered if I'd imagined it all? The crash left scars, cracked ribs healed crooked, a limp when it rained, but my memory of Jesus felt too vivid, too perfect. What if it was just my brain misfiring as I lay dying? "I don't know if I'm doing this right," I finally said. "Ayana and Michael are gone. 50 souls lost. Why me, Lena? Why not them?" She sat beside me, her hand warm on mine. "Maybe it's not about why but what. You're here, and you're changing things. That's enough." Her words steadied me, but the doubts lingered. Dakota, now 17, grew distant too. He'd come home from school with slumped shoulders, avoiding my eyes. "Kids say you're nuts, Dad," he admitted one day, kicking at the dirt outside. "They think you made it up to get attention." His words cut deeper than any crash. I wanted to shield him, but how do you prove a wind no one else felt? The turning point came in the winter of 2014. During a brutal storm that buried Anchorage in snow, I'd been invited to speak at a community center in Palmer, a small town nestled in the Matanuska Valley. The roads were treacherous, but I went, driven by that fire or maybe stubbornness. 50 people braved the blizzard to hear me. their faces a mix of curiosity and desperation. I told my story, the crash, the wind, Jesus's touch. Halfway through, a man stood, his coat dusted with snow. "Name's Hank," he growled. "I lost my wife on your flight. You think your Jesus cared about her?" The room went still. I opened my mouth but no words came. Hank's eyes burned with a pain I knew too well. "You're alive, preaching fairy tales while she's gone. Explain that." I couldn't. I stammered. "I don't have all the answers, Hank. I just know what I saw." He stormed out, slamming the door, and others followed, muttering. The rest stayed, but I felt the weight of failure. Driving home through the storm, my truck skidded on ice, nearly plunging into a ditch. I sat there gripping the wheel, whispering, "Jesus, if this is real, show me again." That night I dreamed. No crash, no wreckage, just a warm wind wrapping around me, carrying his voice. "Caleb, my love is bigger than your questions. Keep going." I woke with tears frozen on my cheeks, the fire rekindled. After that, I pushed harder. I traveled beyond Alaska, Seattle, Portland, even a native gathering in Montana, sharing my story with anyone who'd listen. In 2015, I met a woman named Elsie in Kodiak, a fisherman's widow who'd turned to alcohol after losing her husband. I spoke at a dockside meeting, and she stayed after, her hands trembling. "I saw a light once," she said, "when I nearly drowned. I thought it was nothing. But you make me think it was him." Elsie joined Nita's prayer group, sobered up, and started helping others like her. Through her, I met a young man, Jonah, who'd been a passenger on Flight 214, one of the few survivors. He'd kept silent, haunted by guilt, until he heard me speak. "I saw you in the wreck," he said, voice shaking. "You were dead, Caleb. Then you weren't. I need to know why I'm here too." I told him what Jesus told me. "You're not done." Jonah began rebuilding his life, volunteering with search and rescue teams. The ripples grew. Ray, the mechanic, took my story to his biker crew, turning rough men into quiet seekers. Dakota, inspired by Jonah, faced his classmates' taunts and started a youth group, finding his own faith. Lena joined me on trips, her steady presence grounding me when crowds overwhelmed. In 2017, I faced my biggest challenge. Alaska Airlines invited me to a memorial for Flight 214's victims, 6 years after the crash. It was held at a clearing near the Chugach site, a stone marker listing the lost. Families glared as I approached, whispers cutting through the cold air. "He shouldn't be here." Hank was there, his anger unsoftened by time. I'd been asked to speak, but as I stepped to the podium, Hank shouted, "You don't belong with us." Murmurs rose. I gripped the mic, heart pounding, and said, "I don't deserve to be here. I lost friends too, Ayana, Michael. I don't know why I lived, but I met Jesus in that crash, and he sent me back to tell you you're not forgotten. His love holds us all, even in this pain." Silence fell. Hank's fists unclenched and he sat, head bowed. A woman, Michael's sister, approached after tears streaming. "I hated you for living," she said. "But I felt him, Michael, when you spoke. He's okay, isn't he?" I nodded, unable to speak. Others came, grieving parents, a survivor's spouse, each finding a piece of peace. Now in 2025, I'm older, slower, the limp more pronounced. I write this by a fire in our Anchorage cabin, Lena asleep nearby, Dakota off leading his own life. The fire Jesus lit has spread. Elsie saves souls in Kodiak, Jonah rescues the stranded, Ray's bikers pray in leather, Hank visits me yearly to talk, not yell. The memorial speech shifted something. Families reached out, and I've spent years listening, sharing, healing. Last night, the wind blew warm through my dreams again. Jesus stood there, smiling. "Well done, Caleb. Rest soon." I'm not afraid. I crashed into death and flew back on his grace. That love lives in me, in them, in you. If you read this, know your wings are waiting. Step into the wind, it'll carry you home. By 2026, I'd become a fixture in Alaska's quiet corners. Not as Captain Red Hawk, the pilot, but as Caleb, the man who'd seen Jesus. My story had spread beyond Anchorage, carried by word of mouth, small-town newspapers, and whispered prayers. Lena and I traveled less now, my limp slowing me, but the fire still burned. Dakota, at 31, had taken it further, leading youth retreats across the state, his voice steady like mine once was. Nita's prayer group grew into a network, Elsie's work in Kodiak inspired a recovery center, and Jonah's rescue team saved dozens each year. But not all welcomed the light. That spring a storm brewed, not in the sky but among people. A group calling themselves the Chugach Truthers emerged, led by a man named Silas Kane, a former airline mechanic turned conspiracy theorist. They claimed Flight 214's crash was no accident, that I'd sabotaged it for fame and my Jesus story was a lie to cover guilt. Their pamphlets littered Anchorage, their voices loud at town halls. Caleb Redhawk's a fraud, Silas declared on a local radio show. He's profiting off tragedy. I ignored them at first. Lies don't need answers, I told Lena. But when Dakota came home with a bruised cheek, jumped by truthers after a retreat, I knew silence wasn't enough. They're not just talk now, Dad, he said, ice pressed to his face. They want you gone. Silas rallied his followers for a truth rally in July 2026, set at the Chugach Memorial Site. Word reached me through Jonah, who'd overheard plans to expose me there. Lena urged me to stay away. They're angry, Caleb. Let it blow over. But I felt that warm wind in my chest again, urging me forward. I've faced worse, I told her. Jesus didn't pull me back to hide. Dakota insisted on coming, his jaw set. Nita, Elsie, and Jonah joined too, a small band against a brewing mob. We arrived at the clearing. 50 truthers faced off against a crowd of supporters, the stone marker between them. Silas stood on a makeshift stage, megaphone in hand, spewing venom. This man crashed a plane and invented a savior. He's no hero, he's a killer. I stepped forward, leaning on my cane, and took the megaphone from a stunned Silas. I'm Caleb Redhawk, I said, voice steady despite the ache in my bones. I flew Flight 214. I lost friends, passengers, part of myself. I didn't ask to live, but I did because Jesus sent me back. Call me what you want, but I've seen his love, and it's for you too. The crowd split. Some jeered, others fell silent. Silas lunged, shoving me. My cane clattered and I hit the ground, pain shooting through my leg. Dakota and Jonah rushed in, pulling him off while Nita shouted for calm. Then Hank, yes, Hank from the memorial years ago, pushed through, his grizzled face fierce. Enough, he roared. I hated this man too. Lost my wife on that flight. But he's no liar. I felt it, her peace, through him. Silas faltered, the mob's energy shifting. A woman in the back, a truther, dropped her sign and wept. My brother died on 214, she said. I just want it to mean something. I stood, helped by Dakota, and limped to her. It does, I said. He's not lost. The rally didn't end the truthers, but it broke their momentum. Silas faded into obscurity, his followers splintering. Some joining us, others drifting away. Hank became an unexpected ally, speaking at gatherings with me. His rough honesty softening hearts. Silas had hardened. The woman who'd wept, Mara, started a support group for 214 families, weaving my story into their healing. By 2028, the fire spread beyond my reach. Dakota took it to Canada, training young leaders. Elsie's center in Kodiak drew national attention, a beacon for the broken. Jonah named his rescue boat Grace Wind, saving lives in storms with a quiet faith. Nita's network linked churches across Alaska, a web of light I'd never imagined. I faced my own storm too. That winter my heart faltered. A murmur turned into failure, doctors said. Lena held my hand through tests, her eyes wet but strong. You've flown far enough, Caleb, she whispered. I smiled, feeling no fear. Only that warm wind, steady as ever. It's June 15, 2031, 20 years since the crash. I'm 72, frail, writing this from a hospice bed in Anchorage. Lena sits nearby, reading, her hair silver now. Dakota's on his way, bringing his wife and my grandson, little Caleb, to say goodbye. The room hums with machines, but I hear the wind, soft, golden, calling me home. Yesterday, I saw him again in a dream. Jesus stood on a Chugach peak, robe white against the snow, smiling like an old friend. Caleb, he said, you carried my love well. Come rest. I woke with peace, knowing my flight's near its end. I've lost much, my wings, my crew, years to doubt and hate. But I've gained more. A son who flies my legacy. A wife who held my soul, countless lives touched by a wind I can't explain. Hank visits weekly, Mara monthly, their faces proof of grace. The truthers are a memory. The light remains. If you're reading this, you're part of it. I crashed into death on June 15, 2011, and soared back on his wind. That love waits for you, through storms, through pain, through every fall. Step into it. When I close my eyes tonight, I'll fly one last time, not on a Boeing, but on wings of grace into that endless light. I passed on June 16, 2031, just past midnight. Lena told me later, through Takota's recounting, that the room grew still, the machines hushed, and a soft breeze rustled the curtains, though the window was closed. She swears she felt me smile, though my eyes were shut. Takota arrived too late, holding little Caleb as they stood by my bed, but he said he felt no sorrow, only a warmth, like the wind I'd described. My funeral was small, held in a church overlooking Cook Inlet, the Chugach Mountains framing the horizon. Lena stood strong, her silver hair catching the light, while Takota spoke, his voice breaking only once as he read my last words. Step into the wind, it'll carry you home. Nita, Elsie, Jonah, Hank, Mara, all came, a quiet crowd of lives I'd touched. Even Silas Kane appeared, lingering at the back, his face unreadable. They buried me near the crash site, a simple stone marking my rest. Caleb Redhawk, 1959 to 2031, carried by grace. But my story didn't end there. The fire I'd carried kept burning, passed to hands I'd never foreseen. Takota took my death hard, though he hid it well. At 32, he was a leader, tall like me, with Lena's steady eyes and a faith forged through years of doubt. He'd built his youth retreats into a movement, Wings of Grace, spanning Alaska and beyond. After I was gone, he poured himself into it, driven by my words and a promise he'd made me. I'll keep it flying, Dad. In 2032, he organized the first Grace Flight Memorial, an annual gathering at the Chugach site. Hundreds came, survivors, families, strangers drawn by my tale. Takota stood where I'd fallen, telling my story, then his own, how a boy ashamed of his crazy dad became a man who believed. Little Caleb, just 5, clung to his leg, wide-eyed as the crowd lit candles, their flames flickering like stars against the snow. The movement grew. By 2035, Wings of Grace reached Canada, then the lower 48 states, a network of young people sharing love through service, building homes, feeding the hungry, sitting with the lonely. Takota's wife, Sarah, a teacher, wove my story into lessons, her gentle voice echoing mine. Little Caleb, growing fast, asked questions. Did Grandpa really fly with Jesus? Takota smiled. He did, kid. And he's still with us. Others carried the flame too. Nita, now in her 60s, turned her prayer group into a statewide ministry, training leaders like Elsie to heal with faith. Elsie's Kodiak Center became a model. By 2040, it had branches in Seattle and Vancouver, saving thousands from despair. Jonah, graying but tireless, led his Grace Wind crew through countless rescues, each save a prayer. Hank, gruff as ever, spoke at schools and bars, his story of loss and redemption softening the hardest hearts. Mara's support group for 214 families grew into a national effort, helping survivors of disasters find meaning. Even Silas Kane changed. After my funeral, he sought Takota, head bowed. I was wrong, he said. I felt something that day, your dad's truth. He joined Wings of Grace, using his mechanic skills to fix homes, his loud voice now lifting others. The truthers faded, their anger no match for the wind that carried on. Lena, my rock, stayed in Anchorage, tending our cabin and my grave. She wrote a book in 2036, The Wind He Flew, a quiet memoir of our life, my crash, and the love that outlasted it. It sold modestly, but its word spread, read by pilots, priests, and parents seeking hope. In 2051, 40 years after Flight 214, the Grace Flight Memorial drew its largest crowd, over 1,000, gathered at the Chugach site under a summer sky. Takota, 52, stood with Sarah and little Caleb, now 25 and a pilot himself, flying rescue missions like Jonah once did. Nita, Elsie, Jonah, all older, slower, sat in the front row, their faces etched with years of grace. Hank had passed the year before, but his son read his words. Mara led a prayer, her voice steady. Little Caleb took the podium, his eyes my own. My grandpa crashed here, he began, and Jesus sent him back on a wind of love. He gave it to my dad, who gave it to me. Now it's yours. He lit a candle, and the crowd followed, a sea of flames stretching across the mountainside. Lena, 90 now, watched from a chair, her hand in Takota's, whispering, "You did it, Caleb." As dusk fell, a breeze swept through, warm, golden, unmistakable. Takota felt it, little Caleb too, their candles flaring brighter. The crowd hushed, some weeping, others smiling. He's here, Nita murmured, and Jonah nodded. Always was. I don't know who'll read this or when. Maybe it's you, holding these pages decades after I'm dust. I'm Caleb Redhawk, a pilot who fell from the sky on June 15, 2011, and rose on a wind no one else saw. I met Jesus, felt his love, and carried it as far as I could. But it wasn't mine alone, it's yours too. Dakota's gone now, I imagine, his wings folded beside mine. Little Caleb flies on, Lena rests with me, and the others, Nita, Elsie, Jonah, Hank, Mara, have joined the light or will soon. The wings of grace endures, a flame passed hand to hand, generation to generation, across borders and years. If you're lost, grieving, doubting, listen. That wind's still blowing, soft and warm, waiting to lift you. I crashed into death and flew back to tell you, you're not alone. Step into it, let it carry you, and you'll find home, here, there, everywhere his love reaches. I hear it now louder, calling me beyond the horizon. My last flight's begun.